Zaria Carter was just a delivery driver. Quiet, off the grid, no past, no pedigree. But when 15 elite engineers failed, she walked into a high-security tech facility and solved the impossible, without permission. What no one knew. She's the daughter of Shaquille O'Neal, and someone powerful is desperate to bury that truth. As corporate eyes close in, one question echoes louder than all. How do you silence the girl who was never supposed to exist? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun was unforgiving, high and white, and indifferent, as it beamed down on the sprawling logistics campus just outside Atlanta. A place built on precision, timing, and pride in automation now pulsed with quiet tension, like a watch wound too tight. This wasn't the kind of warehouse where people huddled over clipboards and forklifts beeped in chaos. No, this was top tier. Corporate funded. Every square inch tracked by cameras, every mechanical arm guided by artificial intelligence. In theory, nothing here should go wrong. And yet, everything had. 15 engineers, all credentialed, seasoned, and flown in from every coast. They'd walked into the site over the past 3 weeks with confidence on their collars and lattes in hand. One by one they'd failed. The AI loading bay, codenamed Oculus Dock 7, was supposed to revolutionize last-mile delivery, but it had glitched in ways no one could trace. Routes jammed, auto-loads malfunctioned, crates shattered mid-lift, and worse, the software locked itself mid-reboot. Each minute it stayed down, it cost the company over $20,000 in downstream delays. Logistics managers had taken to pacing like animals. IT leads mumbled theories like prayers. And now, with the quarter's end looming, the executive suite had grown icy and brutal. No one dared admit the truth out loud, but it was right there, growing heavier every hour. The engineers were out of ideas. Yet on the far side of the lot, just past a sun-bleached corner the cameras didn't usually linger on, an electric delivery van hummed in quietly, dented, unwashed, no decals. It rolled to a lazy stop near a chain-link gate that hadn't been used in weeks. The gate buzzed open before the sensor even registered. The van's door creaked open. A lone driver stepped out. She was black, young, maybe mid-20s. Her uniform wasn't official, just black cargo pants and a gray thermal shirt. No name badge, no cap, just a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, scuffed boots, and a pair of blue-tinted work goggles hanging loose from her collar. She didn't hurry, though by all measures she should have. Her scheduled delivery time had passed an hour ago, but she moved with the ease of someone who didn't fear warnings. The shipping clerk at Bay 3 glanced at her, puzzled. He tapped something into his tablet. Her manifest didn't even match today's drop zones, but when he looked up to flag her down, she was already gone. Slipped through the crowd of urgent engineers and crisis consultants unnoticed. Inside the Oculus Bay, chaos had frozen into tense stillness. Everyone stood in a ring around the core module. The system lights blinked red and amber like a heartbeat slowly losing rhythm. One of the lead engineers, a man with decades of experience and a fading lanyard badge, whispered that the AI had entered an abnormal recursive loop. No one really knew what that meant, but it sounded expensive. The strange thing about high-level failure is that it doesn't shout. It quiets everything, makes the air thick. Engineers hovered over their tablets, pretending to analyze. One suggested they rerun the firmware update. Another hinted maybe it wasn't the machine but the shipment architecture. Someone else quietly blamed the data infrastructure vendor. All theories, no solutions. And just behind them, the girl delivery tag Z, according to her van manifest, slipped past the caution tape without a word. No one noticed. She didn't ask for access, didn't flash a badge. She ducked beneath the metal railing and knelt beside the main control panel. Her fingers hovered over the dusty exterior. Then she ran her palm along the side, stopping at a faint groove, barely visible unless you knew where to look. She pulled a compact tool from her bag, flipped open the latch, and exposed a manual port the engineers had missed entirely. Not because they weren't smart, but because they weren't used to looking low. They'd been trained to assume sophistication, to seek answers in code layers and cloud configs. But Z had been fixing machines since she was 11. Foster garage stuff, rusted gears, modded drones, instinct and repetition. She connected a short cable from her wrist device. The lights inside the dock flickered, one long red blink, then a flat white pulse. She rotated a dial, adjusted a voltage modulator the engineers hadn't touched, and then ran a finger over a microsensor strip that had been reversed installed backwards by a rushed factory hand. Then came the hum. It started slow, like a distant train warming up, a deep metallic rhythm rising from the floor. Robotic arms snapped into alignment. Conveyor tracks flickered with green lines. The software interface on the primary screen unbricked itself. One by one, system components came online. A burst of compressed air hissed from the hydraulic vents. The machine lived again. By the time the closest engineer realized something was changing, she was already unplugging the wire. The executive suite, watching via live feed, leaned forward in disbelief. Someone rewound the footage twice, trying to make sense of it. "She's not on our employee list," said one voice. "She's not even certified to be inside that bay," whispered another. Security was dispatched to find her, but she didn't run. She simply walked back through the building the way she came. Steady, unfazed, quiet. At the exit, she signed a departure log no one would read. Then she stepped into the blinding daylight again, and drove off without ceremony. Back in the tower, a VP's hand trembled slightly over his keyboard. He typed her tag into the HR system. No results. Then into dispatch records. There, tucked in a third-party delivery service database, was a temp driver listed only as Z. Carter. No license photo, no tax data. Just an entry timestamped 6 weeks ago. The engineers gathered in a separate room to debrief. They all wanted to know what she'd done, but couldn't admit it in front of each other. Pride was thick. Their failure had been seen, and worse, it had been solved. In a corner office, the company's founder, an ex-military logistics strategist named Nolan Pike, sat silent. He watched the surveillance footage again, slower this time. He froze the frame on Z's face as she walked through the exit gate. There was something familiar, not her face necessarily, but her movement, the way she scanned her surroundings, how she touched the system. "Run a full trace," he muttered. His assistant hesitated. "Sir, I'm not sure that's legal under our new audit protocols." "I said run it." In the van, Z pulled into a gas station off I-85. She didn't look stressed, just thoughtful. She poured herself a black coffee from the station pot, added 2 sugars, and stared at the tiny screen on the wall playing silent news. Her reflection shimmered faintly beside the anchor's face. Her lips curled in the slightest grin. She wasn't surprised the system worked. She knew it would. The trick wasn't brilliance. It was listening. Machines don't lie. They just wait for someone who understands the language beneath the specs. Behind her, a small security camera tilted slightly. And far across town, in a quiet cul-de-sac where morning birds chirped over trimmed lawns, Shaquille O'Neal stood barefoot on his porch, scrolling through emails on a tablet. One message sat unread at the top of his inbox. Subject: unknown tech intervention. Possible identity match. He didn't open it yet, but something in his chest tightened, as if an echo was about to return. The clock in the warehouse had started ticking again, but something deeper had just begun counting down. From the 32nd floor of the glass-paneled corporate tower, the warehouse below looked small, like a plastic model laid out on a grid. The executives usually liked that view. It gave them a sense of dominion systems running clean. Movements calculated, profits predictable. But that morning, the atmosphere in the executive suite had thickened. The calm was cracking. A meeting that wasn't on the calendar had been called within minutes of Doc 7 going back online. The engineering director, compliance officer, 2 VPs, and the CTO crowded into the main conference room. Screens lined the walls. Playback of surveillance footage ran in loops. A woman uncredentialed, unscheduled, and unknown was now the center of every conversation. No one said it out loud yet, but she had embarrassed the entire tech division. The CTO rubbed his forehead hard enough to leave a mark. "You're telling me someone without clearance accessed a critical override point that 15 engineers couldn't find?" "She wasn't in the override logs," snapped the system's lead. "But the camera shows her clearly activating it." "And the system didn't flag her?" "No," muttered the head of security, flipping through digital badge records. "Because she wasn't scanned in. She was inside the delivery manifest. Yes, but not in the building database." The compliance officer leaned forward. "You said her name was Z. Carter?" A junior analyst nodded. "Pulled it from the subcontractor registry. She was listed under Omega Courier Solutions. Temporary hire, 3 weeks active, limited contract routing, mostly non-priority zones." "But that's not what shows up when we cross-reference her drop location," someone added. "She wasn't even scheduled to be near the Oculus Bay today. Her manifest is misaligned. System says she was routed to Bay 12. The room went still. "So what?" barked a VP. "She altered her own route? Overrode the assignment map?" "Maybe she noticed the error," offered someone else, less confident. "Or maybe she just followed instinct." "Instinct doesn't override biometric security." The HR director, who had remained unusually quiet, finally looked up from her tablet. "We have a problem." "What now?" The CTO grunted. "She's not verified. No background data. No formal ID. The name exists but nothing else matches. SSN is flagged as incomplete. Tax information auto-generated. There's no real digital footprint. No medical file. No education records. Not even a DMV hit. It's like she just appeared. Now the silence wasn't professional. It was personal. The room was no longer just confused. It was angry. Angry in the way powerful people get when something they don't control forces them to feel uncertain. A woman, young and black, walking into their glass temple, bypassing all their systems, fixing what no one could, and walking out without asking for anything in return. It unsettled them. It didn't make sense, and that was intolerable. They began pulling up everything. Her courier activity logs, GPS pings, date entries from previous days. The more they looked, the less they found. No red flags, no threatening behavior, just a pattern of quiet efficiency. Always alone, always on time, or close to it. Never talked to anyone, never accessed break rooms, never signed in digitally, except through the third-party app. A ghost in plain sight. Did she tamper with the system? No trace of that, replied the cybersecurity manager. We checked for malware, no external pings, no forced entries. She didn't hack anything. Then how the hell did she know where to go? Someone muttered. Maybe she just saw the problem. Maybe she understood it. The room grew colder. That possibility was more disturbing than sabotage. Then came the final blow. She used a tool, said a compliance tech. It wasn't one of ours. Looked custom. Modified interface. It interfaced with the old prototype firmware. No engineer would have thought to connect that way. Then we need to know who built it, said the CTO, rising from his chair. We need to know who she is. He turned to the compliance officer. Send her name to third-party intel services. Authorize a deep scan. Financials, familial linkages, known associates. I want full background before the end of the day. The HR director hesitated. That could violate subcontractor privacy statutes. If she files a grievance, we could be on the hook. Then bury it under a non-compliance audit. Frame it as a risk mitigation response. I want results. As the others filtered out, frustrated and cautious, one figure remained. Seated at the far end of the table, arms crossed, was senior partner Ellis Grant, retired Army intelligence, quiet investor, rarely spoke in meetings unless absolutely necessary. His expression never changed, calm, almost amused. He tapped his fingers lightly against the steel tabletop and said, almost casually, let it play out. The CTO looked over, frowning. Excuse me? Don't push too hard. Not yet, Ellis said, still watching the looped footage of Z walking through the loading bay. You ever see someone move like that before? The CTO didn't answer. She's not afraid of authority. That's not normal. That's something inherited. Conditioned. I want to see where she goes next. Because if she's who I think she might be, this isn't an anomaly. It's a return. And then he stood and walked out, leaving a silence that lingered longer than it should have. Back in the warehouse, the engineering team was still trying to explain themselves to middle management. Apologies were polished. Language softened. The story was already being rewritten. She didn't fix it. She just triggered something. The system probably needed a final hard reset. There's no way she figured it out that quickly. But beneath the surface, they all knew the truth. In the next building over, a legal team was preparing a scripted response for internal distribution. We are currently investigating a technical anomaly at Dock 7. We appreciate the rapid response of our contracted support teams and remain committed to our security protocols. Behind a closed door, another document was being prepared. A quiet clause in the delivery vendor's next contract renegotiation. All temporary drivers must submit biometric verification and undergo active ID trace. They didn't say her name, but everything was now being rewritten because of her. Meanwhile, on the lower level of the building, an old server pinged with an inbound request. A deep scan was initiated from the mainframe, the kind that scrapes every archived identity tag from public and private databases. The request was locked with executive authorization, encrypted. And across town, sitting at a sidewalk cafe beneath a faded awning, Z watched traffic roll by with one leg crossed over the other, and her bag sitting untouched beside her chair. Her eyes weren't scanning license plates. She was watching the flow, the way delivery trucks interacted with city buses, how street sensors flickered on just a half-second too slow at the intersection. She took it all in, absorbed it, not because it mattered today, but because it would tomorrow. Her phone vibrated once, a low, subtle ping, not from a call, from her device, a signal. Someone had accessed a trace log she'd planted deep inside the loading bay's subroutine. She knew they would. She wanted them to. Back in the tower, the CTO's assistant stood stunned in front of her screen. Sir, she said cautiously, I ran the trace on Z Carter. Something came back. The CTO leaned over. What is it? Nothing in criminal databases, no public affiliations. But a facial geometry hit came up in a medical database from 19 years ago. There's a 93.7% match to a sealed birth record. The room went still again. Whose record? The screen flicked once, then resolved. A hospital registry. The name of a child born without a legal father listed. A birth mother's name, redacted. The note, private guardianship relinquished. Child placed under state protection. The CTO stared. What's the match connection? The assistant scrolled down. There's an attached legal motion, filed by someone trying to gain access to the child's information. It was denied. The request was made by Shaquille O'Neal. Everyone froze. And then the weight of it sank in. Somewhere between the delivery app, the scratched-up van, and the ghost-like presence in their system, they had unknowingly crossed paths with someone carrying the bloodline of a legend. Z Carter wasn't just a mystery. She was a storm. And it had only just begun. The morning was warm but indifferent, and the warehouse's mechanical heart kept pulsing in frustration. The Oculus Bay had resumed motion, but the people inside were still frozen in disbelief. Confusion clung to the walls like condensation. No alarms had gone off. No technician badges had scanned in. No authorization request had been made. And yet, the bay had come back to life. No one saw the moment she slipped in. Not clearly. A few employees recalled a flash of black cargo pants, a pale gray shirt. One thought she might have had blue-tinted goggles, but couldn't be sure. She didn't walk with arrogance, but she also didn't walk like she was uncertain. That unsettled them more than anything. Z wasn't here to prove herself. She wasn't chasing approval. She had the kind of stride that belonged to people who'd long since stopped asking for space. She made her way past the central data kiosk and onto the restricted repair strip, unnoticed by anyone not actively looking. Even the guards at the surveillance post were late to react, distracted by a flurry of Slack pings from the exec floor. Their attention was focused on the engineers, whose growing embarrassment was now being broadcast in near real time to partners, clients, and curious board members. Nobody expected a delivery driver to become the main character in the room. She walked straight to Dock 7, past the yellow warning stanchions and the neatly stacked toolkits the engineers had abandoned hours ago. Her gaze swept left, not hurried, not probing, just deliberate. A faint film of friction had built up on the delivery rail, almost invisible unless you knew to look. She ran her fingers along it, then checked the magnetic locks. They weren't tight. A low-level thermal sensor on the mount had been misaligned by less than a degree, not enough to throw off diagnostics, just enough to make the AI believe it was malfunctioning, when really it was stuck in a logic loop, misinterpreting its own safety conditions. Zed crouched and opened a side latch beneath the auxiliary unit. The engineers hadn't touched it. It wasn't on the schematic they'd been sent, but it was real. A maintenance bypass installed during the prototype phase and forgotten. She connected her wrist device, not with software, but with current. The pulse of raw voltage hummed through the circuit. She didn't override the AI. She reset its sense of feel, its tactile parameters. Let the machine recalibrate its body before it re-engaged its mind. No one had time to stop her before it was over. The interface flickered from red to a flat golden glow. Dock 7 aligned. The robotic arms stretched and returned to resting pose, as if exhaling. The system was alive, and calm, and ready. And in that stillness, only one person had moved with purpose. A logistics supervisor, halfway through his third espresso, blinked hard and tapped his headset. Did someone just fix it? Someone had dialed, and she was already walking out. Zed didn't linger. She walked the edge of the room, avoiding direct lines of sight, stepping through the grid like someone who understood its rhythm better than its designers. She slipped between a pallet jack and a discarded transport crate, her canvas bag swinging loose by her side. No hurry, no pride, just silence. Outside, the wind was picking up. The hum of air conditioning units formed a constant drone behind her, and yet she never missed a step. She paused at a hydration station, took a paper cup, filled it, and drank like she hadn't just walked into a high-security tech facility and done what a team of specialists couldn't. She left the cup on the edge of a bench, not bothering to throw it away, not out of disrespect but because her mind was already 10 steps ahead. Back in the surveillance room, the cameras had finally caught up. A tech assistant rewound the footage and stared. Frame by frame, the story became clearer. She had walked in without a badge, touched critical infrastructure, triggered a legacy port no one else had accessed, and fixed the system, all under 12 minutes. What the hell? The technician whispered. She's not even in the building log. The assistant director of operations, who had been checking his email moments earlier, now leaned in with sharp focus. Freeze that. Zoom on her device. They couldn't identify the model. It wasn't standard. Looked modified. Homemade maybe. The kind of tool you build when you don't trust what the market sells. When you've had to adapt. When you can't afford mistakes. Where is she now? Someone asked. The response came back too late. She'd already exited through the old delivery lot gate. The footage showed her tapping something on her phone. Then she was gone. No chase. No confrontation. Just gone. At the executive floor, heads turned as the news trickled up. The engineers were being called in one by one for debrief. Half of them were drafting postmortems trying to preserve what was left of their reputations. A few were already making excuses. She must have had access to our back-end protocols. She probably saw our logs somehow. There's no way she guessed that port's activation code. But none of them could explain how she knew. How she walked in like someone born with the map already imprinted behind her eyes. Downstairs, a junior data analyst named Ren, who'd only been working there for 2 months, took a risk. She bypassed her lead's credentials and traced the van manifest from the driver log. She had to dig through layers of subcontractor data. Finally, a name. Not even a full one. Just Z. Carter. Assigned 3 weeks ago. No birth date. No verified ID photo. Just a routing number and a contact phone flagged unverified. Ren stared at the name. There was something odd about it. Something almost too clean. Too empty. "What are you doing?" her lead asked, leaning over her desk. She alt-tabbed. "Just filtering out incomplete logs," she lied. "Don't waste your time on the wrong story," he said. "She'll be gone by tomorrow. HR will sort it." But the story wasn't gone. It was spreading, even if quietly. Within hours, 2 internal Slack channels were filled with GIFs of the control panel lighting up. Engineers were privately messaging each other, trying to understand what had happened. In public, no one mentioned her name. But behind every sentence, you could hear the same question echoing in different forms. Who is she? How did she know? Why did no one stop her? Up in the Skybridge lounge, founder Nolan Pike had already watched the footage 3 times. His jaw was tight, not with anger, but something deeper. Curiosity, maybe. Unease, a strange combination of admiration and fear. He stared at the slowed clip again. The way her hands moved over the machine. The way she scanned the room with exacting calm. It reminded him of someone. Someone he hadn't seen in a long time. He tapped a folder open on his device. A personal archive. Inside, a grainy photo from almost 2 decades ago. A photo of a young woman standing beside a prototype. She'd been part of the early days. Brilliant, quiet, gone too soon. His fingers hovered over the image. The resemblance wasn't perfect, but the presence, that was what haunted him. He closed the file, then opened a secure channel.
Run a deep trace on Z Carter.
I want real-time facial mapping. Match against all known patent collaborators in the last 30 years. Use cross-generational patterning. His assistant hesitated. That's not within our data agreement. I'll authorize it. Back in her van, Z was parked on the edge of an overpass, watching cars thread beneath her in seamless lines. She sat with the window down, eyes closed, feeling the warm air. She wasn't rushing. She'd done what she came to do. She pulled out her device again, made 3 small notations. It wasn't just a tool, it was a living log. She logged the friction readings, the thermal offset, the latency pattern, then closed it. Everything she needed, she kept to herself. In her rearview mirror, the building she'd just left sat still and small in the distance. She wasn't planning on returning. But across town, in a quiet, sunlit kitchen, Shaquille O'Neal was staring at the same building on a screen. He still hadn't opened the flagged email. He was looking at the subject line, just the subject line. He whispered under his breath, not to anyone in particular. "She moves like someone I used to know." And deep in the server stack of the warehouse, an internal error report refreshed again. Over and over. Unclear how it had self-corrected. Unclear why the reboot log was unsigned. But one line was added to the root registry, time-stamped at the exact minute the system came back to life. Manual overtade registered, unknown user in it okay. Whoever she was, she didn't ask for permission. She just walked in, fixed the unfixable, then walked out without looking back. And someone somewhere had just realized she wasn't supposed to exist in their records, but now they couldn't erase her from their minds. The morning sunlight spilled lazily across the kitchen table at Lucille O'Neal's house, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon and browned butter. The radio played softly from the windowsill, an old-school R&B track drifting through open windows and echoing faintly down the street. It was the kind of day that didn't beg for attention. It just was. Warm, slow, and steady. And Shaquille O'Neal, barefoot in a worn big Aristotle apron, was humming to himself as he flipped pancakes on the stove. His size made the kitchen feel like it belonged in a dollhouse, but he moved through it with practiced ease, like he'd always known how to make small spaces fit his big frame. Lucille sat at the head of the table, coffee in hand, skimming the local newspaper with a faintly amused expression. "You gonna burn those, son?" she said without looking up. Shaq chuckled, flipped the last pancake with a theatrical wrist, and slid the stack onto a plate the way a man does when he's done this 100 Sundays before. "Burnt means crispy," he replied, "and crispy's a vibe." She rolled her eyes, but she smiled. They'd made it a ritual, these quiet mornings. No agents, no press, no speeches, just conversation. Lately, those talks had wandered deeper. About legacy, about the difference between rich and respected, about what happens when systems built for profit forget the people who run them. Shaq poured maple syrup like he was painting a canvas. "I just don't get it," he said. "All these companies out here preaching innovation, diversity, equity, but then they treat workers like numbers. Let something break. First call is legal, not people." Lucille nodded slowly. "It's because they think empathy is a liability, but it's not. It's the missing code." He leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her as if every word was more valuable than his entire shoe deal. "That's what I want the kids to learn. Legacy's not about what you leave behind. It's what you build while people are still watching." The house phone rang. Shaq glanced over, surprised. Barely anyone called the landline anymore. Lucille picked it up. "O'Neal residence." Her voice brightened slightly. "Oh, hi, baby. He's right here." She handed the phone off with a quizzical expression. "It's Nolan." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Nolan Pike?" She shrugged, said it's urgent. He took the receiver. "Yo." The voice on the other end was clipped, dry. "Shaq, you need to see something."
"I'm off the grid today, man. Mama's house, pancakes, you know the vibe."
"This ain't a vibe. This is something else." Shaq straightened up. There was a tone in Nolan's voice that didn't match business as usual. More like something sitting just beneath the surface. Confused, cautious, maybe even afraid. "Talk to me," he said. "I sent you a file. Private server. Footage from our warehouse down in East Point. Something happened yesterday. We had a system failure. 15 engineers couldn't fix it, but a delivery driver walked in and solved it. In minutes." Shaq raised his eyebrows, impressed. "Well, hire her." "Yeah, about that. No one knows who she is. She wasn't authorized. Her ID's a shell. But it's not just what she did, Shaq. It's how she did it. Watch the clip." He opened his tablet, entered the secure code Nolan sent, and pulled up the video. It was simple. A still warehouse, blinking lights. Then her, moving through the chaos with total calm, stepping past protocol like it didn't exist, kneeling beside the control panel, opening it with bare familiarity. Her fingers danced over wires and circuits like she'd installed them herself. She never hesitated, never second-guessed. She simply knew. Shaq froze. He rewound it, watched again, slower. Lucille looked up from her paper. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Something caught in his throat. It wasn't her face. He couldn't see it clearly through the grain of the footage. But it was the way she moved, the posture, the focus, the ease. He set the tablet down. "I've seen that before," he said quietly. "Seen what?" He looked at his mother. "Those hands, that rhythm. I've seen it in the mirror, seen it in you. It's like family moving through muscle memory." Lucille put her mug down. Her face changed, not alarmed, but pained in a way that made time slow down. "What did you say her name was?" "Z Carter." Lucille blinked. Then she stood, walked to the cabinet, pulled out an old manila folder from behind a row of cookbooks. She hadn't touched it in years. She placed it on the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a hospital record. "Do you remember that summer in Toll 6? You'd just come off your third ring. You were tired, traveling. I tried to tell you, but the timing was never right." Shaq read the paper. A name, a date. Child of interest, female, unnamed, guardianship waived. "What is this?" he asked, voice suddenly low. Lucille sighed. There was someone, a girl. Her mother didn't want to be found. Signed her away before we could do anything. But I followed the case for a while. Then it vanished into state care. Shaq stepped back, the air too heavy now. "You think that's her?"
"I don't know, but your body does."
He stared at the screen again, replayed the footage for the 5th time, and this time he noticed something else, something the others might have missed. The tool she used. It wasn't off the shelf. It was hand-built. The grip had a small carve on the side, a symbol he recognized. An old etching he'd once used when signing gifts to kids at tech camps. A tiny gesture no one but he and Lucille had ever used. A spiral within a spiral. He said nothing, just stood there, locked in the knowledge that whoever she was, Z Carter wasn't just some tech prodigy off the street. There was a connection. Lucille spoke softly. You need to find her, before someone else does. And he knew she was right. Because if he was getting that call, others already were too. Back in the corporate tower, Nolan Pike was already preparing for damage control. HR had launched a non-compliance report. The legal team was building a narrative to contain the story. And the engineering team was being coached on how to answer press questions if it leaked. But Nolan kept one copy of the footage to himself. A private file, labeled not by date or location, but by something else. One word. Resemblance. He didn't know what came next, but he had enough sense to feel when the old system was about to get disrupted. And somewhere between those pancakes and the playback loop, Shaq knew the same. This wasn't just a moment. This was legacy returning in an unexpected form. Quiet, brilliant, and carrying a story that had waited far too long to be told. He grabbed his keys. Lucille didn't ask where he was going. She already knew. The room was colder than it needed to be. On the surface, it was a plain corporate interview suite. Frosted glass walls, a circular table too clean to have seen any real decisions, and a single camera embedded in the upper corner of the ceiling. A sign on the door read, "Post-event debrief, safety and compliance." But everyone inside knew this wasn't about safety. It was about containment. Zau sat alone on one side of the table, hands folded loosely, posture relaxed. Her gray shirt was still faintly smudged with mechanical dust, but her eyes were clear, sharp, observant, unreadable. She didn't look nervous. She didn't fidget. And that, more than anything, unsettled the three people across from her. A VP of operations, a legal compliance officer, and an HR liaison, all chosen for their ability to smile through discomfort and get people to talk without force. But from the moment Z entered, the air in the room belonged to her. The VP began with pleasantries. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice. We just want to make sure that everything from yesterday's anomaly is logged properly. Nothing formal, just clarity." Z nodded once. "Okay." The HR rep smiled tightly. "We understand you were in the Oculus Bay during the system reset. Can you walk us through what happened from your perspective?" ZA tilted her head, considering. "I saw the system was locked in a false loop. The thermal sensors were misaligned. Friction on the guide rail caused mechanical hesitation. AI interpreted it as obstruction. I corrected the sensor, rerouted the voltage load, rebooted from the prototype port, and let it run its own recalibration." Silence. The VP blinked. The legal officer cleared his throat. "You're not certified in our infrastructure, correct?" "No," Zai said. "I wasn't supposed to be in that bay. So why go in?" "It needed to be fixed." Another silence followed, more loaded this time. The VP leaned forward. "You do realize there are protocols in place to prevent unauthorized access?" Zal didn't flinch. "I didn't access it. I solved it." The HR rep chuckled awkwardly. "You do understand how unusual this is?" Z finally broke her stillness, leaned back and looked at each of them. "You called this a safety debrief, but what you really want to know is who I am, how I knew what to do, and why I walked in like I belonged there." That hit like a glass cracking under pressure. The VP glanced at the compliance officer, who was already typing notes. Zed continued, voice calm. "I grew up in the foster circuit, moved between 6 homes before I turned 16. I wasn't adopted. I wasn't chosen. But I found things that made sense, things that didn't care where you came from. Machines, engines, code, logic. I taught myself because no one else did. Fixed things people thought were dead. Built a drone out of scrap when I was 14. Patched school buses with stolen parts. The world didn't give me much, but I learned to read systems like second language." The room stayed quiet. The HR rep asked softly, "What's your real name?" Z shrugged. "They gave me Z at the last placement center. Zaria was on some temporary papers. Carter came from the system autofill when I turned 18. There's no birth certificate, no family record, just recycled files." The legal officer frowned. "Have you ever attempted to find your birth parents?" "No point. You can't search for ghosts." Outside the room, in a dimmed command suite where the real power sat, a screen lit up with the live feed from the interview. Nolan Pike stood with arms folded, watching the exchange unfold with hawk-like patience. Behind him, a separate monitor was running a background process, still decoding a quietly initiated DNA scan, taken from the fingerprint scan Z had unknowingly completed when she entered the building 2 weeks ago. The process was nearly complete. A match had been found. Nolan's assistant stepped in silently, handed him a file. Inside, a match result, 93.7% certainty, and a name, Shaquille O'Neal, paternal link. Nolan exhaled slowly. Well, damn. Back in the interview room, the tone shifted. The VP tried to recalibrate the energy with charm. You know, our engineers were surprised. One of them said you were, quote, scarily smart, that you handled that interface like someone born inside the system. Z smiled faintly. Not out of pride, more like she was amused by the reaction. That's what happens when you work with your hands more than your mouth. The HR rep leaned in. You never went to college? No, I passed on the debt. Certifications. Built my own. You don't need a license to understand structure. You just need patience, curiosity, and a reason. The compliance officer clicked his pen twice. But how did you know where to access the prototype port? That feature isn't in any current schematic. Zad didn't answer for a beat. Then coolly, because I don't look for what's new. I look for what got buried. That line hung in the air. The VP cleared his throat. There are opportunities we could discuss. Contract expansion. Specialized placement. We believe you might be a fit for a... Zad raised her hand. I didn't come here to be recruited. The VP sat back. Then what do you want? She paused. A clear exit path. No record. No blacklisting. No retaliatory clause hidden in paperwork. I want to leave the way I came in, free. The HR rep looked genuinely puzzled. Why not stay? You've proven your skill. You're exactly the kind of talent I'm not interested in proving anything anymore, Zay said. Not to systems that would have never opened the door unless something broke first. That shut down the room. Outside the glass walls, the hallway was bustling. People passed by with badges and tablets and wireless headsets, oblivious to the quiet revelation unfolding behind that door. Z stood. Are we done? The VP gave a slow nod. For now, you're clear to leave. She stepped out of the room, her boots clicking faintly on the tile. She didn't look back. Across the city, in a high-rise apartment surrounded by echoes of trophies and framed jerseys, Shaquille O'Neal stood in front of a screen that now displayed the same genetic report Nolan held in his hand. He didn't speak, just stared at the photo pulled from security footage, the side profile of a girl who moved like memory. Lucille came up behind him. It's her, isn't it? He nodded once. She doesn't even know. Lucille whispered. She doesn't know the bloodline she carries. Shaq stepped away from the screen, his voice low. But she's got it. All of it. The mind. The fire. The way she looks at a system like it ain't bigger than her. He picked up his phone. I need to meet her. No cameras. No headlines. Just face to face. And somewhere downtown, walking through a crowd she didn't belong to, Z disappeared into the flow again. No destination in mind. Only movement. Only silence. She had no idea that across the city, a legacy long buried was watching her steps. Waiting. Hoping. Preparing. And the system that had never truly seen her? It was about to remember her forever. It began 19 years ago, in a dim hospital hallway lined with late-night silence and vending machines humming faintly in the background. The birth had been sudden, unplanned, not tragic, but heavy with weight. Behind the maternity ward's double doors, a young woman barely 20 clutched the bed rails and pushed through hours of pain, her eyes glassy and wide, her breath sharp and uneven. Her name was never shared with the nurses, not fully. She gave one first name, a fake last, and when they asked about the father, she shook her head, eyes blank with panic. The baby arrived at 3:08 a.m., female, quiet at first, then loud, strong lungs, clear voice. The staff cleaned her gently, wrapped her in the kind of hospital cotton that never quite feels like home, and placed her beside the woman who wouldn't hold her. She stared, tired, frozen, not heartless but overwhelmed. She signed a form without reading it, a confidentiality release, guardianship waiver, voluntary discharge of maternal rights. The lines were filled out in generic ink, and when the social worker arrived later that morning, the woman was gone. No note, no number, only the baby remained. That infant spent her first night in a sterile bassinet under flickering fluorescent lights, alone but not abandoned, cared for but unclaimed. On the other side of the country, Shaquille O'Neal was locked in a media storm. NBA contracts, championship parades, press interviews, sponsorship negotiations. His world was cameras and handlers and hotel suites that blurred into each other. He never got the call, never saw the letters, because someone made sure of that. The woman who gave birth had been part of a brief, quiet chapter in Shaq's past. A moment that could have meant more, but never had the chance to. They had crossed paths briefly during a summer in Orlando, when his life was a whirlwind and hers was unraveling. She had told him she was fine. She hadn't been. Lucille had sensed something wasn't right. There was a note of silence in the girl's voice the last time they spoke. She followed up once, twice, then the phone went dead. The address bounced, and when she hired someone to dig deeper, the only thread that came back was a hospital code from Georgia, patient file sealed under emergency anonymity. For a year, Lucille pursued legal inquiry, tapping every favor she was owed, but the courts wouldn't release the name. The waiver had been ironclad. The birth mother had chosen to disappear, and the child had vanished into the folds of the state. Shaq never knew. Not really. He asked once, but Lucille hadn't been sure enough to break his heart over a maybe. She carried the possibility alone, each year getting heavier with the suspicion that something sacred had been taken from her family before it had a chance to exist. And then, almost 2 decades later, a lawyer knocked quietly at a side entrance of a private venue in Atlanta, where Shaq was scheduled to speak at a youth mentorship event. No press, no security alert, just a quiet man in a navy suit, holding a weathered folder.
"Mr. O'Neal," he said, offering a respectful nod. "My name is Carlton Avery. I represent a data protection firm that was contracted for forensic archival tracing."
Shaq blinked. A what firm? It's a bit complicated, sir, but one of your old acquaintances from the logistics sector authorized a backtrace on a biometric hit, a delivery driver, Z. Carter. Shaq's expression didn't change, but the energy around him shifted. "She came up in a flagged match," Avery continued, "from a hospital file dated 19 years ago. The genetic markers have since been cross-referenced with your blood panel from a sponsored health campaign you did in 2010. 93.7% paternal certainty." He handed over the folder. Inside were 2 pages. One, the birth summary, redacted heavily but still legible. The other, a side-by-side image comparison. Zimmerman, a freeze frame from the warehouse footage, and a newborn hospital photo attached to an old child welfare card. Shaq's hands didn't tremble, but he didn't move for a long time. The world seemed to shrink around the pages in his grip. Everything else, lights, voices, time, fell away. "She never knew?" he asked finally. "No, sir," said the lawyer. "According to the records, she's never been told. The system reclassified her, under state guardianship, at age 3. No adoptive family listed. She's aged out since then. Self-taught, independent file. Does she know now?" "We don't believe so." Shaq stared at the photo again. It wasn't the eyes that hit him. It was the expression, that hard-to-place combination of calm and control. Like a mind always calculating, always assessing. The same look he wore when sizing up defenders on the court. Not arrogant, just absolute. He nodded once. "Thank you." The lawyer turned to leave, but hesitated. "She's brilliant, sir. I've seen a lot of cases over the years. Rarely do we trace someone with her kind of intelligence, independence, and silence. She operates like someone who never expected help, but never feared the world either." Shaq didn't reply. Later that night, in the quiet of his home office, he opened the folder again. This time slowly, reverently. The photo of the baby was faded but not forgotten. A full head of hair, tiny fists curled like anchors. He picked up his phone but didn't dial. Not yet. He was still letting it settle. The loss, the theft of time, the silent years. He imagined her growing up in a foster home that never felt like home, learning to fix broken things not because she wanted to, but because nothing else worked, teaching herself because no one else was around to guide her. Lucille entered the room. She didn't speak, just stood behind him, hand resting on his shoulder. "I could have found her," she whispered. "I should have pushed harder." "No," Shaq said quietly. "You did what you could. The system was built to keep her hidden. But she came back anyway." Lucille sat beside him, her voice steady. "She's a miracle, you know. A bloodline rerouted. And still she rose." Outside, the city lights blinked in slow rhythm. The world was still rushing past itself, but something in their home was still. Shaq stared at the name again. Zaria Carter. A name created by the state, carried by a girl who never asked for it. He whispered to himself, "She deserves to know the truth. Not from a file, from me." And somewhere, under the quiet neon of a late-night repair garage, Zaria wiped grease from her knuckles and checked the diagnostics on a beat-up solar-powered bike. The machine was old, temperamental, but she'd figured out how to make it hum again, just like everything else she'd ever touched. She didn't know that across the city, A door had just opened that no one could close. A truth, long buried, was now on its way to meet her, not with noise, but with a father's silence, shaped by 2 decades of what-ifs. She didn't know the bloodline she carried. But she was about to. Zaria had always known how to move through a place without being seen. Not hidden, exactly. Just never noticed long enough for anyone to remember her once she left. She wore silence like armor, letting her tools speak louder than her mouth, her eyes always scanning, reading systems the way most people read street signs. But now, after everything that had happened at the Oculus Bay, the silence had changed. It felt watched. It felt loaded. She walked into the same warehouse the following week and felt the shift before anyone said a word. People stepped aside too quickly. Conversations hushed when she passed. A few workers smiled, overly polite. Others avoided eye contact altogether, like they didn't know how to handle what they'd seen. The floor manager handed her a sealed envelope with a congratulations sticker on it. Inside, an offer letter. Full-time contract, triple her temp pay, relocation option, sign-on bonus, and a glossy brochure folded behind it showing a newly opened R&D campus in North Carolina. She folded the paper in half without reading the rest and handed it back. "I don't need a permanent seat to do what I came to do," she said. The manager tried to chuckle. "Not many folks turn this kind of thing down, Z. Especially not after the stunt you pulled."
It wasn't a stunt, she replied. It was maintenance.
She kept walking. In the break room, a box of gourmet chocolates with a note that read, "For your brilliance," sat waiting for her. She didn't touch it. She never liked bribes that came dressed as kindness. On the loading dock, a junior engineer approached her with a designer messenger bag. "Corporate wants to upgrade your gear. Consider it." She cut him off. "My old gear works fine." That afternoon, the shift supervisor asked her to step into a quick check-in with HR. She declined. "I'm not an employee. You can't schedule me." It wasn't defiance. It was clarity. But the eyes kept coming. She could feel them in the gaps between machines, in the doorways she passed, in the delay between when she swiped her access badge and the gate opened. Just enough hesitation to remind her that someone somewhere was watching. Z didn't scare easily, but what she feared now wasn't surveillance. It was uncertainty. A shift in the pattern she couldn't decode. A story forming around her that she didn't write. The tipping point came in the most mundane place, the vending machine alcove near Dock 4. She stood in line behind 2 warehouse techs and a guy she'd seen before but never really noticed. Name tag read, Denny. He always wore the same brown beanie, always had grease under his fingernails. The kind of guy who didn't flinch when you walked past with a wrench in your hand. Today, though, he wouldn't meet her eyes. She stepped beside him. "You know something I don't?" He hesitated, then rubbed his jaw. "They said you're someone important." Zed froze. "Who's they?" Denny looked around. His voice dropped. "I don't know the details. Just heard talk from upstairs. Legal flagged your name. HR's been talking like you're connected." She narrowed her eyes. "Connected how?" He shrugged, uneasy. "Like, famous family type, like you didn't come from nowhere." So didn't wait for the rest. She turned and walked. Fast, past the mailroom, past the shipping chute, into the corridor where the light flickered with that high buzz frequency that always made her jaw tense. Her heartbeat wasn't panic, it was pressure. She tapped her wristband, checked the log. Nothing had changed in the interface, but she saw it now. Subtle anomalies. A scan time off by milliseconds. Her device had been mirrored, cloned briefly, somewhere in the system. Someone had looked inside. Outside, she walked past the employee shuttle bay, through the gate that separated the main lot from the perimeter drop zone. The sun was low, washing the asphalt in golden haze. That's when she saw it. A black SUV, parked, engine idling. No license plate visible, windows tinted. She kept walking, pretending not to see it. But her phone vibrated, not from the app, from the encrypted channel she rarely used. A message flashed on the locked screen. 5 words. "Your father wants to meet." She stopped mid-step. The heat of the afternoon didn't reach her anymore. The hum of trucks faded. Everything narrowed to the shape of that sentence. Her father. She didn't know what that word was supposed to feel like. She'd heard it from other kids in the group homes. Some with anger, some with hope, most with nothing. For her, it had been a blank space. A box left unchecked. She opened the message. No sender ID, no timestamp, but it pulsed with authenticity. "Don't be afraid. He just wants to talk. No cameras, no press, just the truth." Zach stared at it, then at the SUV. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the ground shift beneath her. She turned around. walked back toward the building, sat on the loading dock bench, and tried to slow her breath. Her thoughts were racing but landing nowhere. Why now? Who was he? And why had no one told her anything until now? She thought back to every face in every file, every name she'd seen stamped on her temporary records. None had matched. Not once. Not a whisper of family. And yet here was this message, timed too precisely, aimed too directly, and impossible to ignore. The system around her had cracked wide open, and in the breach, a flood of questions she wasn't prepared for. She didn't leave work that day. She stayed until the night shift rolled in. She worked on a disassembled routing bot that wasn't on her list, just to feel something under her hands, just to center herself. When she left, the SUV was gone, but the message wasn't. Later, in her small apartment, one room, metal frame bed, 2 crates stacked as a desk, Z stared at the wall. The window was open. The city outside buzzed with weekend sounds. She could feel the world trying to push something onto her. A story, a name, a destiny maybe. But she wasn't built for fairy tales. She was built from salvage and grit. Still, she typed one word into her private device. Why? She didn't send it. She just saved it. The air outside the logistics campus was dry and still. The kind of quiet that didn't feel natural, like something was holding its breath. The rows of trucks sat parked in silent symmetry. Engines cooled, hydraulic arms tucked in like sleeping limbs. Late afternoon light stretched long across the asphalt, and the entire complex felt half-paused, like a stage waiting for the curtain to rise on a scene no one had rehearsed. He arrived without noise. No SUV convoy, no flash cameras, no handlers, no giant entourage announcing who he was or why he had come. Just Shaquille O'Neal, 6'11", broad-shouldered in a dark zip hoodie and old jeans that barely fit his frame. No jewelry, no sunglasses. His phone was in his back pocket, untouched. He stood next to a rental sedan, leaning against the passenger side with his hands folded. Just a man, a father, waiting. Zed stepped out of the rear exit of the facility, cautious but composed. The message had come again that morning. Same number, same simplicity. He's here. If you want to come, he's waiting. She didn't reply, but something in her body moved anyway. She crossed the rear lot slowly, the gravel crunching under her boots with every step. The wind tugged at her shirt, lifting her collar slightly, but she didn't adjust it. Her breath was steady, her steps sure, but her eyes gave her away. There was a flicker there, just behind the calm, a tremor she didn't let touch her voice, but it was in her bones. Shaq didn't move when he saw her. He didn't smile, didn't blink fast like someone emotional. He just stood straighter, like the air had changed and he needed to brace for it. She stopped about 10 feet from him, didn't speak, didn't lower her eyes. He stepped forward. And then nothing. No dramatic speeches. No tears shouted into the sky. No declarations of lost years or stolen time. Because this story had never lived in the noise. It was always in the silence. In the tension behind their ribs. In the questions neither of them could voice. Not yet. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Old. Creased. She recognized it instantly. The medical report. Her origin. The record she was never meant to see. He offered it. She took it with both hands, not out of ceremony, but because she suddenly didn't trust her fingers not to shake if she used just one. She didn't read it. Not now. She already knew what it said. It wasn't about the ink. They stood there, in the sunlight, long enough for the shadows to shift at their feet. He finally broke the silence, not with words, but with movement. His hand extended, not a demand, not a pull, just a gesture, open, heavy with apology and uncertainty. She looked down at it. And then slowly, like breaking a lifelong habit, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The hug wasn't soft. It wasn't easy. It was rigid at first. Two people unsure of what this contact meant. Unsure if their bodies even knew how to do this. Then it changed. The tension melted. Her arms tightened. His breath hitched. It didn't matter what either of them said after that. Because the truth had already happened. And both of them were living in the aftershock. They stayed like that. Long enough for the sun to dip a little further. Long enough for the pressure to ease. Long enough for her heart to stop kicking against her ribs. They didn't speak much after, just exchanged looks that did more than language could manage. He handed her a card with a handwritten number on the back. No assistants, no agents, just his. She didn't promise to call, but she kept it. They parted without fanfare. But not without change. She returned to the building not as a mystery, but as a storm that had calmed. Her stride was still measured, still grounded, but there was a gravity now that hadn't been there before. She no longer walked like a ghost. She walked like someone seen. But not everyone was thrilled. From the upper floor of the operations building, behind reflective glass, a man in a tailored suit watched her step back inside. His expression was unreadable. His jaw clenched subtly. This reunion hadn't been on the schedule. It hadn't been sanctioned. And worse, it threatened to disrupt something far more valuable than reputation: control. Ellis Grant had spent years consolidating influence across the tech arms of the logistics firm. He knew every system flaw, every exec weakness, every silent buyout before it hit the market. He had tolerated Nolan Pike's occasional theatrics, even indulged the bleeding heart experiments with inclusion and mentorship. But this DNA surprise, this connection to someone untouchable, that wasn't a variable he liked. Because now Z wasn't just the girl who walked in and solved the unfixable. She was his daughter. And that meant she had leverage. He turned from the window and picked up the internal comm. Send me her file. Every touch point. Every security flag. I want to know who knew what and when. And flag all outbound access logs from her device since last week. His assistant hesitated on the other end. Sir, Pike authorized a lockout freeze on her profile. Says she's protected under... I didn't ask what Pike said. Just do it. He ended the call. Outside, in the stillness of the lower lot, the wind picked up. Zai was gone. Shaq was already halfway down the freeway, but a ripple had started. And it wasn't done moving. No headlines broke that morning. No ticker tape alerts. No press releases splashed across screens. The world kept moving. Deliveries shipped, contracts signed, emails sent without urgency. But inside the headquarters of Pike Systems, something fundamental had shifted. And no one at the top saw it coming. Zaria had watched in silence, the same way she always did. Not with suspicion, but with awareness. She didn't fight back in noise. She studied patterns, not just in code, but in people. And over the past 3 months, while board members panicked over her public image, while Ellis Grant laid trap after trap, she was documenting, saving, recording. Every vague clause in her temporary contract. Every internal memo suggesting she be neutralized reputationally. Every back-channel attempt to deauthorize her system access through quietly rerouted IT requests. It all piled up, layered, labeled, stored in a private encrypted vault that no one could touch. But she wasn't just archiving, she was calculating. Shaq had once told her, after their first real conversation off camera, power is loud, ownership is quiet. He didn't push her to fight the company, he just gave her names. A legal advisor in Arizona, a former business manager with deep pockets in Atlanta, a forensic equity analyst who owed him a favor from 2008. They didn't work in PR. They worked in shadows, people who moved shares like pieces on a chessboard. It started with a holding company, formed under a nondescript name, Tria Orbitals LLC. It acquired a 0.6% stake in Pike Systems from an ex-board member looking to liquidate, then another 1.2% from a Canadian firm exiting the logistics sector, then another 3% from a fund too distracted to notice the name on the transfer file. Zin never touched the paperwork herself. She didn't need to. She had built her life on learning what people ignore. By the time Ellis Grant submitted his merger proposal, a move that would have gutted half the company's domestic teams and outsourced innovation to a tech partner overseas, he believed he had the votes. He walked into the quarterly board meeting with his shoulders high and voice calm. He was ready to close the chapter. But then 2 directors abstained. One abstention turned into an unexpected dissent. The vote broke apart. Confused and flustered, Ellis demanded a review. That's when a silent shareholder stepped forward. On paper, a shell firm with just over 6.8% equity, just enough to request a vote to block the merger and trigger a review of internal leadership. The firm was backed by legal counsel, who presented a quiet but devastating packet: evidence of targeted surveillance on Zaria Carter, tampered access logs, internal emails suggesting the use of strategic narrative redirection to manage her story. Alongside it, documentation of disproportionate temp worker oversight in lower income zones, many of them Black or Latino, cross-referenced against promotion denials. It wasn't emotional, it was surgical. And it was enough. Within 2 weeks, Ellis Grant had resigned for personal reasons. The merger fell through. Pike Systems went under review. A new board chair was installed. Someone who came from community logistics, not private defense contracts. Culture shifted quietly. Bonuses were capped. Ethics review committees were rebuilt. But still, no one in the press connected the dots. No one said Zaria's name. That was how she wanted it. In a world obsessed with credit, she chose clarity. She never claimed revenge. She reclaimed ground. She never gave an interview. Never tweeted a statement. Never signed a memoir deal. Instead, she kept building. The warehouse she worked in before, the one where it all started, had since transitioned into a community innovation hub. Interns came in weekly. Former delivery drivers now learned predictive logistics coding. Hardware kits were passed out to local schools. And Z? She showed up like always, early, quiet, focused. Wearing overalls and a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, she walked between rows of refurbished delivery bots humming along a test track. The floor gleamed now, not because of corporate polish, but because people cared about the space. One of the interns, a kid named Levi with quick hands and louder curiosity, asked her if it was true. She once hacked a full system with nothing but a modified driver unit. She smiled. No, she said. I understood it. She turned to adjust the routing software on one of the bots. The machine rotated smoothly, its wheels tracking in perfect symmetry. It wasn't fancy, it was functional, and that's what mattered. Upstairs, a security camera panned silently. It saw her, but it didn't name her. Because the company no longer controlled the story. She did. And even then, she didn't own it in the traditional sense. She just shaped it. A final memo was circulated inside the boardrooms of Pike Systems. A new section in their founding charter, Employee-Guided Innovation Initiatives. It had no logo attached, but everyone in the room knew who had inspired it. She never needed a crown. Just space to be who she was born to be. If this story moved you, don't scroll past, lean in. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet disruptors who change everything. Stay close, because the next chapter isn't about what's gone viral. It's about what's underground, unwritten, and coming fast. The system's evolving, and you won't want to miss who rewires it next. It started with a single headline. One blog. A tech leak site known for exposing corporate secrets posted a blurry still from security footage, matched it to a whistleblower tip, and ran it with a punchy title. Big Shaq's secret daughter solves what 15 engineers couldn't. The story exploded in less than 24 hours. Mainstream media picked it up. News anchors with plastic smiles narrated over silent clips of Z bypassing the Oculus-based systems. Social media dissected the footage like it was a Super Bowl highlight. Analysts speculated. Influencers reacted. Overnight, Z went from mystery to myth. They didn't care about her story. They cared about the spectacle. A delivery driver turned tech savant, a forgotten daughter of a cultural icon. Every outlet wanted a piece. They called it inspiring, miraculous, disruptive. They wrapped it in sound bites and dropped her into morning news debates. But she was nowhere to be found. Z disappeared from the building 2 days after the media storm began. Left no forwarding address. No signed NDA. No staged interview. Just vanished. She declined every offer. Speaking engagements. Feature profiles. Sponsored partnerships. One network even pitched a documentary series called Cold-Blooded, the Zaria Carter story. They never heard back. Instead, she was in a quiet warehouse district on the city's edge, renting a forgotten workshop behind a closed-down auto detailer. Concrete floors, exposed beams, rusted lockers, nothing but tools, wires, a 3D printer, and a whiteboard covered in system schematics only she could fully understand. She didn't care about fame. She cared about fixing things. Shaq knew where she was. He didn't visit, not often. But every week, without fail, he sent her one thing: supplies. Not flashy, not expensive, just practical. A custom soldering kit, precision screwdrivers, a rare thermal processor he knew she'd been looking for, based on an old inventory list. The packages never had his name on them. She still knew. He was proud, but careful. He knew he couldn't rush this. The world had stolen her early years. If she wanted to let him in, it had to be on her time. Lucille, though, wrote letters. Actual handwritten ones. She didn't try to be poetic or nostalgic. She just wrote as if they'd always known each other. She shared small updates about her garden, her arthritis, a peach pie recipe that still didn't quite set right. She included Polaroids, pictures of Shaq as a teenager, of herself, younger. One showed a small wooden crib with a caption, "We bought this, just in case." Zedden tried back, but she kept the letters, tucked them inside a drawer beneath her desk. She read them slowly, like decoding a language she hadn't realized she'd missed. Then came Shawnee. She reached out with care. A short voice message, not pushing. "I know we've never met, and I don't want to overstep. I just wanted you to know I've thought about you. Even when I didn't know you existed. You're not alone in this, C. You don't have to carry the whole story by yourself." Zay didn't respond at first. Then a week later, she replied with a single line. "Thanks for not pretending." In the space where celebrity wanted to claim her, a family was forming in quiet. No red carpets, no applause, just real people, trying to learn each other again. But not everyone was content. Inside the headquarters of Pike Systems, the board of directors had split into factions. Some believed the media frenzy was a golden opportunity. Use Z as a brand ambassador, align with Shaq's public persona, rebuild trust through her authenticity. Others, led by Ellis Grant, weren't so eager to play into sentiment. He saw Z as a destabilizing force, a variable with too much influence, too little control, a potential legal threat with growing public capital, and more importantly, a distraction from the larger restructuring he'd been quietly preparing. An acquisition merger with an international logistics firm that would reassign key assets, relocate hundreds of jobs, and dissolve the very team Z had made look foolish. But with her now seen as a symbol of brilliance, resilience, and rebellion, the optics were delicate. Ellis met privately with 2 legal consultants. She doesn't want the spotlight, one said. She's actively avoiding it. We could wait her out. Ellis shook his head. That's exactly what makes her dangerous. Someone who walks away from power can't be bought, and people like that, they come back with purpose. He began drafting a plan, not a smear campaign. Too risky. Not a legal trap too public. Something quieter. He'd start by cutting her access to internal systems, under the guise of restructuring security protocols. Next, he'd begin dissolving third-party delivery contracts, the same vendors Z once worked under. By severing the threads that connected her to the infrastructure, he'd isolate her from influence. Or so he thought. What he didn't see was that Z had already moved beyond their grid. In her small workshop, she was building a prototype, not a product, a platform, something new. A decentralized logistics interface for community-based routing, designed to bypass corporate AI bottlenecks, made for small businesses, local couriers, tech apprentices. A system that would restore control to the people who moved packages, not just the ones who tracked them. It wasn't flashy, but it was elegant, and if she finished it, it would become a blueprint for disruption. One evening, as she coded through dusk, the radio buzzed with a segment about her. A panel show host joked about Shaq's genius mystery daughter, building an empire in hiding. Another laughed. She turned it off. Because none of them got it. The applause had faded, and that's where the real test began.